20 specialists had given up hope as Officer Sarah Mitchell lay dying in intensive care, her organs failing from a mysterious condition that stumped every doctor at Metropolitan General Hospital. 4 days of exhaustive testing revealed nothing as her family prepared for the worst possible outcome. Then Marcus Thompson, a handcuffed drug dealer awaiting transport to county jail, overheard the medical team's frustrated discussions and made an impossible claim. He knew exactly what was killing the police officer and how to save her life, despite being arrested in the same drug bust that had put Sarah in the hospital. Officer Sarah Mitchell lay motionless in the intensive care unit of Metropolitan General Hospital, her vital signs steadily deteriorating despite the combined efforts of 20 different specialists who had examined her case over the past 4 days without identifying the mysterious condition that was slowly claiming her life. "We've run every test imaginable," Dr. Robert Chen explained to Chief of Police David Rodriguez during their third emergency consultation. "Blood work, imaging studies, toxicology screens, infectious disease panels. Everything comes back normal, but she continues to decline without any identifiable cause." The frustration in his voice reflected the collective helplessness of an entire medical team that had exhausted their diagnostic capabilities while watching a young police officer waste away from an unknown ailment that defied classification. "How long does she have?" Chief Rodriguez asked quietly, his professional composure barely containing the emotional strain of potentially losing one of his best officers to a medical mystery that seemed beyond the reach of modern medicine. "Because her family is flying in from across the country, and they need to know what we're facing." Dr. Chen's hesitation before answering spoke volumes about the gravity of Sarah's condition and the medical team's inability to provide hope or concrete information about her prognosis. "At her current rate of decline, maybe 48 hours, he replied with the clinical detachment that medical professionals use to mask their own sense of failure when confronted with cases that challenged their expertise. "Her organ systems are shutting down systematically, but we can't identify the underlying cause or develop an effective treatment protocol." The admission that 20 specialists had failed to diagnose Sarah's condition created an atmosphere of desperation that would soon lead to an unlikely intervention from the most unexpected source imaginable. "Chief, there's something else," Dr. Chen continued reluctantly. "Officer Mitchell was found collapsed in the evidence room at your station, and she'd been working a narcotics case involving some unusual substances that we haven't been able to identify completely." His revelation about Sarah's work environment introduced new variables into her medical mystery while raising questions about occupational hazards that might have contributed to her mysterious illness. "She was examining evidence from the Riverside drug bust," Rodriguez confirmed. "Several kilograms of unknown powder that our lab couldn't classify definitively, though preliminary tests suggested some kind of synthetic compound that we'd never encountered before." The connection between Sarah's police work and her medical crisis would prove more significant than anyone initially realized. The morning rounds that brought Dr. Jennifer Walsh to Sarah's bedside included the routine consultation with security personnel who monitored high-risk patients. But none of the medical staff expected that the handcuffed prisoner awaiting transport would become the key to solving a diagnostic puzzle that had stumped the hospital's entire medical team. "Excuse me, Doc," called Marcus Thompson, a 35-year-old drug dealer who had been arrested during the same Riverside bust that had provided the evidence Sarah was examining. "I couldn't help overhearing about the cop who's sick, and I think I might know what's wrong with her." His unsolicited medical opinion drew skeptical looks from the security guards who assumed he was attempting to manipulate the situation for personal advantage rather than offering legitimate assistance to law enforcement personnel. "Mr. Thompson, I appreciate your concern," Dr. Walsh replied diplomatically. "But medical diagnosis requires specialized training and extensive testing that we've already completed thoroughly with our most experienced physicians and consultants." Her polite dismissal reflected the natural assumption that a drug dealer couldn't possess medical knowledge that exceeded the capabilities of 20 board-certified specialists who had examined Sarah's case. "Doc, I know you think I'm just some street dealer trying to cause trouble," Marcus persisted with urgency that surprised everyone within earshot. "But I spent 6 years in pre-med at Northwestern before I made some bad decisions that landed me in this life, and I've seen what synthetic opioids can do when they're not properly identified or treated. His revelation about medical education created pause among the listening healthcare workers who had assumed his street credentials precluded legitimate academic background or professional knowledge. What exactly are you suggesting? Dr. Walsh asked with growing interest, her professional skepticism balanced by recognition that desperate medical situations sometimes required unconventional approaches to diagnosis and treatment. Because if you have specific information about Officer Mitchell's condition, we need to hear it regardless of your current legal status. Her willingness to consider Marcus's input reflected the desperation that characterized medical teams facing unexplained cases that threatened patient lives while challenging professional competence. The powder she was examining, Marcus continued with clinical precision that contradicted his criminal background. It's not just synthetic fentanyl like your tests probably indicated. It's been contaminated with industrial chemicals that create delayed toxic reactions that won't show up in standard drug screens or blood work. His specific knowledge about the evidence Sarah had been handling provided the first concrete lead that connected her mysterious illness to her professional activities. The detailed explanation that Marcus provided about the contaminated drugs revealed sophisticated understanding of both pharmacology and toxicology that impressed the medical team while highlighting how his criminal involvement had provided knowledge that legitimate medical education couldn't replicate. The dealers in that bust were cutting pure fentanyl with methyl ethyl ketone and acetone to increase volume and profitability, Marcus explained with the technical precision of someone who understood both the chemistry and the medical implications of such adulteration. But those industrial solvents create metabolites that cause delayed organ failure through pathways that standard toxicology screens don't detect. His explanation provided specific mechanism for Sarah's unexplained deterioration while demonstrating knowledge that exceeded typical street-level drug dealing to encompass sophisticated understanding of chemical interactions and medical consequences. MEK exposure causes delayed hepatic and renal dysfunction that mimics autoimmune disease, Marcus continued. But the standard tests you've been running won't identify the specific metabolites because they're not included in routine toxicology panels, and the symptoms develop 12 to 72 hours after initial exposure. His precise timeline matched Sarah's clinical progression while providing diagnostic framework that had eluded 20 specialists who lacked his specific knowledge about industrial chemical contamination in street drugs. If I'm right, she needs immediate chelation therapy with dimercaprol and aggressive dialysis to remove the chemical metabolites before they cause irreversible organ damage, Marcus concluded. But you're running out of time because MEK poisoning becomes untreatable after about 96 hours of symptom onset. His treatment recommendation demonstrated not just diagnostic insight but also therapeutic knowledge that could potentially save Sarah's life if his analysis proved correct. Dr. Walsh, how could we verify his theory? Asked Dr. Chen, who had been listening to Marcus's explanation with growing amazement at the clinical sophistication of someone he had assumed lacked relevant medical knowledge. Because if he's correct, we need to act immediately to have any chance of reversing Officer Mitchell's condition. The urgency in his voice reflected recognition that Marcus's explanation provided the first coherent account of Sarah's illness that connected her symptoms to a specific causative agent with known treatment protocols. We need specialized mass spectrometry to identify MEK metabolites, Dr. Walsh replied. But that could take hours to arrange, and if Mr. Thompson is correct about the timeline, we may not have hours to spare before Officer Mitchell's condition becomes irreversible. Her assessment of the time constraints created additional pressure to make treatment decisions based on incomplete information while gambling with a patient's life based on the medical advice of an incarcerated drug dealer. The ethical consultation that Dr. Walsh hastily arranged with the hospital's medical review board reflected the unprecedented nature of accepting diagnostic and treatment recommendations from a criminal defendant whose medical credentials couldn't be immediately verified through normal professional channels. We have a patient dying from an unknown condition, and the only person who claims to understand her illness is someone arrested for drug dealing who says he has medical training, Dr. Walsh explained to the emergency ethics panel. which creates obvious questions about whether we should risk unproven treatment based on potentially unreliable information from someone with questionable credibility and clear motivation to manipulate the situation. Her presentation of the ethical dilemma highlighted the conflict between professional standards that required verified credentials and desperate circumstances that might necessitate accepting help from unconventional sources. "Has anyone verified this prisoner's claimed medical education?" asked Dr. Patricia Williams, the Chief Medical Ethics Officer, because making treatment decisions based on unconfirmed advice from someone with criminal background could violate our professional responsibilities and potentially harm the patient if his information proves incorrect. Her concern about due diligence reflected standard medical protocols that required credential verification before accepting clinical advice, though such procedures seemed inadequate for emergency situations involving unique knowledge that might not exist within conventional medical communities. "I've contacted Northwestern University," replied Dr. Chen, "and they confirmed that Marcus Thompson was enrolled in their pre-medical program from 2008 to 2014, maintaining a 3.8 GPA with particular strength in biochemistry and pharmacology before dropping out in his senior year." His verification of Marcus's academic background provided partial validation for his claimed expertise while raising questions about why someone with such strong medical preparation had chosen criminal activity instead of completing legitimate medical education. "The question isn't whether he has relevant knowledge," Dr. Williams observed, "but whether we can ethically base life-or-death treatment decisions on advice from someone whose current legal status suggests judgment problems that might extend to his medical recommendations." Her analysis highlighted the philosophical tension between Marcus's demonstrated academic capabilities and his criminal behavior that called his judgment into question. "Dr. Walsh, what's your clinical assessment of his diagnostic explanation?" Dr. Williams continued, "Because regardless of his background, if his theory makes medical sense and provides our only hope of saving Officer Mitchell's life, we may have ethical obligation to pursue treatment despite our concerns about the source of information." Her pragmatic approach balanced professional skepticism with recognition that desperate medical situations sometimes required accepting help from imperfect sources when conventional approaches had failed completely. The decision to proceed with Marcus's recommended treatment protocol represented a calculated gamble that reflected both the desperation of Sarah's medical team and their grudging recognition that his explanation provided the most coherent account of her mysterious illness that anyone had offered. "We're going to start chelation therapy and prepare for emergency dialysis," Dr. Walsh announced to the medical team, based on the theory that Officer Mitchell is suffering from industrial chemical poisoning that wasn't detected by our standard testing procedures. Her decision to implement Marcus's treatment recommendations without definitive confirmation reflected the urgency of Sarah's deteriorating condition and the absence of alternative approaches that offered any hope of recovery. "I want continuous monitoring of all vital signs and immediate notification if there are any changes in her condition." Dr. Walsh continued, "Because we're essentially conducting experimental treatment based on theoretical diagnosis that could either save her life or accelerate her decline if we're wrong about the underlying cause." Her acknowledgement of the risks involved highlighted how desperate medical circumstances could force physicians to make decisions based on incomplete information when delay might prove fatal regardless of the treatment chosen. "Dr. Chen, I want you to personally supervise the chelation protocol," Dr. Walsh directed. "And I want detailed documentation of every aspect of treatment and patient response because this case will likely require extensive review regardless of the outcome." Her emphasis on documentation reflected understanding that using treatment advice from an incarcerated drug dealer would generate significant administrative and professional scrutiny that could affect careers and institutional reputation. "What about Mr. Thompson?" asked the attending nurse. "Should he remain available for consultation if questions arise during treatment, or should he be transported to county jail as originally scheduled?" Her question about Marcus's continued involvement reflected practical recognition that his unique knowledge might prove valuable during treatment implementation even though his criminal status complicated any ongoing medical consultation relationship. "Keep him here until we see how Officer Mitchell responds to treatment," Dr. Walsh decided. Because if his diagnosis is correct, we may need additional information about the specific chemical compounds and their interactions that only he seems to understand. Her decision to retain Marcus as informal consultant represented unprecedented collaboration between medical professionals and criminal defendant that challenged normal protocols while prioritizing patient welfare over institutional procedures. This is either going to save her life or end several medical careers, Dr. Chen observed quietly. But given that 20 specialists have failed to identify her condition, maybe we need to consider unconventional sources of medical knowledge when conventional approaches have been exhausted. His philosophical reflection captured the risk-reward calculation that characterized the medical team's decision to gamble Sarah's life on advice from someone whose criminal background contradicted his demonstrated medical sophistication. The gradual improvement in Sarah's vital signs over the following 12 hours provided dramatic validation of Marcus's diagnostic insights and treatment recommendations, transforming him from dismissed criminal to reluctant medical consultant whose knowledge had potentially saved a police officer's life. Her kidney function is improving significantly, Dr. Chen reported during morning rounds, his voice reflecting amazement at Sarah's response to treatment that had been based on advice from an incarcerated drug dealer rather than conventional medical consultation. And her liver enzymes are beginning to normalize after 72 hours of steady deterioration that had us preparing her family for the worst possible outcome. The objective medical evidence of improvement provided concrete validation for Marcus's theory about industrial chemical poisoning while highlighting how his street-level knowledge of drug contamination had provided diagnostic insights that eluded 20 board-certified physicians. The chelation therapy is removing exactly the metabolites that Mr. Thompson predicted we would find, Dr. Walsh added. And the dialysis is clearing chemical compounds that our standard toxicology screens had completely missed despite their obvious impact on Officer Mitchell's organ systems. Her acknowledgement of Marcus's diagnostic accuracy forced recognition that criminal involvement in drug trade had provided medical knowledge that legitimate education and professional experience hadn't replicated among the hospital's medical staff. I have to admit that I was skeptical about taking treatment advice from someone with his background, confessed Dr. Patricia Santos, the nephrologist who had supervised Sarah's dialysis. But his understanding of the chemical pathways and metabolic processes involved in this poisoning exceeded anything I learned during my residency training in toxicology. Her professional humility in acknowledging Marcus's superior knowledge highlighted how specialized experience could transcend formal credentials when it came to understanding specific medical conditions that fell outside normal clinical practice. The question now, observed Chief Rodriguez during his morning visit to Sarah's bedside, is how someone involved in drug dealing developed medical expertise that surpassed our best physicians and potentially saved one of my officers' lives. His curiosity about Marcus's background reflected broader questions about how criminal activity had provided knowledge that could benefit legitimate medical practice if properly channeled and validated. More importantly, Rodriguez continued, we need to understand whether his knowledge about contaminated drugs could help us prevent similar poisonings among other law enforcement personnel who might be exposed to these substances during narcotics investigations. His recognition of occupational safety implications suggested that Marcus's expertise might have broader applications beyond Sarah's individual case if properly integrated into police training and medical protocols. I think we need to have a serious conversation with Mr. Thompson about how he acquired this knowledge and whether he might be willing to share additional information that could benefit both medical treatment and law enforcement safety, Dr. Walsh concluded, her suggestion reflecting pragmatic recognition that Marcus's criminal background didn't negate the value of his medical insights for protecting other people from similar chemical exposure. The background investigation that Chief Rodriguez ordered into Marcus Thompson's history revealed a complex personal narrative that explained how someone with exceptional academic potential had ended up dealing drugs while retaining sophisticated medical knowledge that could save lives. Thompson was accepted to Northwestern Medical School after completing his undergraduate degree, Detective Lisa Martinez reported. But he dropped out 6 weeks before graduation when his younger brother was killed in a gang shooting and he decided to enter drug dealing to support his brother's 3 children and their mother. Her research into Marcus's life story provided context for understanding how family tragedy and economic desperation had derailed a promising medical career while preserving the knowledge that had just saved Sarah's life. His professors remember him as one of the most brilliant students they'd ever taught, Martinez continued, particularly in pharmacology and toxicology, where he demonstrated intuitive understanding of drug interactions and chemical processes that exceeded graduate-level expectations. The academic assessment of Marcus's capabilities validated his medical expertise while highlighting the tragic waste of potential that had resulted from his decision to abandon legitimate career pursuits for criminal activity motivated by family responsibilities. He's been arrested 12 times over the past 8 years, Martinez added. But every arrest involved nonviolent drug offenses, and several defense attorneys mentioned that he seemed more knowledgeable about the medical effects of the substances he was selling than most physicians they'd encountered in drug-related cases. Her observation about Marcus's continued medical interests despite his criminal career suggested that his academic passion had persisted even as his professional trajectory diverged from conventional medical practice. What's most interesting, Martinez concluded, is that 3 of his previous arrests resulted in dismissed charges after he provided information that helped medical professionals treat overdose victims whose conditions had puzzled emergency room physicians. The pattern of Marcus using his medical knowledge to help others despite his criminal status provided evidence of character complexity that transcended simple categories of good and evil while demonstrating consistent commitment to saving lives regardless of legal consequences. It sounds like we're dealing with someone whose criminal behavior was motivated by family loyalty rather than greed or malice, Chief Rodriguez observed, and whose medical expertise has been consistently used to help rather than harm people despite his involvement in illegal drug distribution. His analysis of Marcus's character suggested that traditional criminal justice approaches might not be appropriate for someone whose illegal activities coexisted with genuine desire to use medical knowledge for beneficial purposes. The moral complexity of Marcus's situation became apparent during the extended conversation that Dr. Walsh conducted with him while Sarah continued her recovery from industrial chemical poisoning that his diagnosis and treatment recommendations had successfully reversed. Mr. Thompson, I need to understand how you maintain such sophisticated medical knowledge despite spending 8 years involved in drug dealing rather than practicing legitimate medicine, Dr. Walsh began, her question reflecting professional curiosity about how academic learning had been preserved and applied outside formal medical settings. Dr. Walsh, I never stopped studying medicine, Marcus replied with obvious passion for the subject that had defined his academic career. Because even though I couldn't practice legally, I knew that my knowledge could help people who got hurt by the drugs that people like me were selling. His explanation revealed ongoing commitment to medical learning that transcended his criminal activities while highlighting moral complexity of someone who dealt drugs while simultaneously trying to minimize their harmful effects. I've probably read every major toxicology journal published in the last 8 years, Marcus continued. And I've consulted informally on dozens of overdose cases where emergency room doctors couldn't identify the substances involved or understand why patients weren't responding to standard treatments. His description of unofficial medical consultation demonstrated how his knowledge had been regularly used to save lives despite his illegal status and inability to practice medicine through legitimate channels. The drugs on the street have become incredibly dangerous, Marcus explained, because dealers cut them with industrial chemicals and synthetic compounds that create medical emergencies that most physicians have never encountered, and someone needs to bridge that knowledge gap to prevent people from dying. His rationale for maintaining medical expertise highlighted how criminal involvement had provided unique insights into drug-related medical crises that formal medical education didn't address adequately. I know I made terrible choices that hurt people and violated the law, Marcus acknowledged, but I've tried to use whatever knowledge and skills I have to prevent deaths and help people recover from poisonings that conventional medicine couldn't understand or treat effectively. His acceptance of responsibility for criminal behavior while defending his medical activities reflected complex moral reasoning that recognized both the harm of his drug dealing and the value of his life-saving medical interventions. Officer Mitchell would be dead if you hadn't spoken up, Dr. Walsh observed. which raises difficult questions about how society should respond to someone who breaks the law while simultaneously saving lives through medical expertise that serves the public good. Her acknowledgement of the ethical paradox created by Marcus's situation highlighted broader questions about criminal justice, medical ethics, and social redemption that defied simple moral categories or legal solutions. The professional recommendation that Dr. Walsh submitted to the hospital administration and local law enforcement reflected her assessment that Marcus's medical expertise represented valuable resource that could benefit public health and safety if properly channeled through legitimate institutional frameworks. Marcus Thompson possesses medical knowledge that exceeds many practicing physicians in specific areas of toxicology and drug-related emergencies, she wrote in her formal report, and his willingness to use that knowledge to save lives suggests rehabilitation potential that traditional criminal justice approaches might not recognize or develop effectively. Her professional evaluation balanced acknowledgement of Marcus's criminal behavior with recognition of his medical capabilities and commitment to helping others despite personal legal consequences. I recommend that consideration be given to arrangements that would allow Mr. Thompson to complete his medical education and pursue legitimate practice under appropriate supervision and monitoring, Dr. Walsh continued, because his knowledge and skills represent community assets that could save lives while providing him with constructive alternative to criminal activity. Her suggestion for educational redemption reflected belief that exceptional circumstances might justify unconventional approaches to criminal rehabilitation when offenders possessed skills that could benefit society through legitimate channels. The medical profession has ethical obligation to recognize and nurture healing capabilities regardless of their source, Dr. Walsh concluded. And Mr. Thompson's success in diagnosing and treating Officer Mitchell's condition demonstrates competencies that warrant serious consideration for professional development rather than simple incarceration. Her philosophical argument about medical ethics and social responsibility challenged conventional assumptions about criminal justice while advocating for approaches that maximized public benefit through redemptive rather than purely punitive responses to crime. Furthermore, she added, Mr. Thompson's knowledge about contaminated drugs and their medical effects could inform training programs for emergency medical personnel and law enforcement officers who face similar chemical exposure risks in their professional duties. Her recognition of the broader applications for Marcus's expertise highlighted how individual rehabilitation could generate systematic benefits for institutions and communities that dealt with drug-related medical emergencies. I believe that supporting Mr. Thompson's return to legitimate medical practice would honor both the life he saved and the potential he demonstrated for using specialized knowledge to serve rather than harm the community, Dr. Walsh concluded. Her recommendation reflecting belief that exceptional circumstances warranted exceptional responses that prioritized public welfare over conventional criminal justice procedures. The legal proceedings that followed Sarah's recovery created an unprecedented situation where prosecutors had to balance criminal charges against someone whose illegal activities had been accompanied by life-saving medical interventions that demonstrated character complexity beyond typical drug dealing cases. Your Honor, Mr. Thompson's actions saved a police officer's life when 20 medical specialists had failed to identify her condition, argued defense attorney Patricia Chen during sentencing hearings, which suggests that his criminal behavior coexisted with genuine commitment to using his medical knowledge for beneficial purposes rather than pure profit or malicious intent. Her argument for leniency reflected recognition that Marcus's case challenged traditional assumptions about drug dealers while highlighting moral complexities that deserved consideration in determining appropriate legal consequences. The prosecution acknowledges Mr. Thompson's assistance in Officer Mitchell's case, responded District Attorney Robert Martinez, but we cannot ignore that his drug-dealing activities contributed to the same public health crisis that his medical knowledge occasionally helped to address, creating moral contradictions that don't excuse criminal behavior. His balanced assessment recognized Marcus's positive contributions while maintaining that criminal activity required legal accountability regardless of mitigating circumstances that might influence sentencing considerations. Mr. Thompson, the court faces unusual situation in determining appropriate response to your criminal behavior. Judge Sarah Williams addressed Marcus directly. Because your actions represent both harm to community through drug dealing and benefit to community through medical expertise that saved a law enforcement officer's life. Her acknowledgement of the moral paradox created by Marcus's case reflected judicial recognition that exceptional circumstances might warrant creative sentencing approaches that balanced punishment with rehabilitation opportunities. I'm prepared to consider alternative sentencing that would allow you to complete medical education under court supervision, Judge Williams continued, provided that you demonstrate genuine commitment to using your knowledge and skills through legitimate medical practice rather than continued involvement in illegal drug distribution. Her offer of educational redemption represented an innovative approach to criminal justice that prioritized public benefit and individual rehabilitation over traditional incarceration that might waste valuable medical capabilities. The court will sentence you to 5 years supervised probation with conditions that include completion of medical degree, passage of medical licensing examinations, and supervised medical practice that serves underserved populations who need access to the kind of expertise you demonstrated in Officer Mitchell's case, Judge Williams concluded, her creative sentencing reflecting belief that exceptional circumstances warranted exceptional responses that maximized social benefit while maintaining appropriate accountability for criminal behavior. This sentence reflects court's assessment that your medical knowledge represents community asset that should be developed and channeled through legitimate practice rather than destroyed through incarceration that serves no constructive purpose, she explained, providing philosophical framework for decision that challenged conventional criminal justice approaches while prioritizing public welfare and individual redemption. The medical school re-enrollment process that Marcus completed under court supervision represented unprecedented collaboration between educational institutions, criminal justice system, and healthcare organizations that recognized his unique qualifications and commitment to using medical knowledge for beneficial purposes. Northwestern has agreed to readmit Mr. Thompson under special probationary status that includes enhanced supervision and community service requirements, announced Dean Patricia Rodriguez during a press conference that highlighted the educational innovation represented by Marcus's return to medical studies. Because his demonstrated expertise and life-saving capabilities suggest that completion of formal medical training could benefit both individual rehabilitation and community healthcare needs. Her institutional support for Marcus's educational redemption reflected recognition that exceptional circumstances warranted flexible approaches to admission standards and degree completion requirements. Mr. Thompson will be required to complete additional coursework in medical ethics and professional responsibility, Dean Rodriguez continued, while participating in supervised clinical rotations that emphasize service to underserved populations who face drug-related health crises similar to those he encountered during his period of criminal involvement. The enhanced curriculum requirements reflected understanding that Marcus's background created both opportunities and responsibilities for using medical training to address social problems that conventional medical education might not adequately prepare physicians to handle. His unique knowledge about contaminated street drugs and their medical effects will be incorporated into toxicology training for other medical students, the dean added, because his experience provides insights that could help future physicians diagnose and treat poisonings that conventional education doesn't adequately address. The integration of Marcus's street-level knowledge into formal medical curriculum demonstrated how individual redemption could generate systematic educational benefits that improved medical training and patient care capabilities. We're also establishing a scholarship fund in Officer Sarah Mitchell's name that will support medical students who demonstrate commitment to serving communities affected by drug-related health crises, Dean Rodriguez announced, because Mr. Thompson's case illustrates how medical expertise can emerge from unexpected sources and serve beneficial purposes when properly channeled through legitimate institutions. The scholarship program created lasting legacy for Sarah's medical crisis while providing framework for supporting other students whose backgrounds might include unconventional but valuable experience relevant to medical practice. Northwestern is proud to be part of Mr. Thompson's rehabilitation and professional development, the dean concluded, because his success demonstrates that educational institutions have responsibility to recognize and nurture healing capabilities regardless of their origins or the personal histories of those who possess them. Her philosophical statement about educational mission and social responsibility provided framework for understanding how individual cases could influence institutional policies and practices in ways that benefited broader communities. The specialized medical practice that Marcus established after completing his degree focused on treating drug-related medical emergencies and providing consultation for law enforcement agencies that faced similar chemical exposure risks to those that had nearly killed Officer Sarah Mitchell. Dr. Thompson's clinic serves as bridge between street-level drug knowledge and legitimate medical practice, explained Public Health Director Dr. Maria Santos during evaluation of the innovative healthcare model, providing treatment for populations who face chemical poisonings that conventional emergency medicine often fails to diagnose or treat effectively. The unique positioning of Marcus's practice between criminal knowledge and medical expertise created new possibilities for addressing drug-related health crises while validating the rehabilitation approach that had transformed his criminal background into community asset. His consultation services for police departments have already prevented 3 similar poisoning cases, Dr. Santos continued, because his training programs help law enforcement officers recognize chemical contamination risks and seek appropriate medical attention before symptoms become life-threatening. The practical applications of Marcus's expertise demonstrated how individual redemption could generate systematic benefits for institutions and communities that faced ongoing challenges related to drug-related health and safety issues. Dr. Thompson's success challenges traditional assumptions about criminal justice and rehabilitation, observed criminal justice reform advocate Jennifer Walsh, because his case demonstrates that people with criminal backgrounds may possess valuable skills and knowledge that benefit society when channeled through appropriate institutional frameworks rather than destroyed through purely punitive approaches. Her analysis of Marcus's transformation provided evidence for policy arguments about criminal justice reform that emphasized rehabilitation and social contribution over simple incarceration and punishment. The medical profession has gained a practitioner whose understanding of drug-related emergencies exceeds most conventional training, Dr. Santos concluded. While the criminal justice system has demonstrated that creative sentencing approaches can transform offenders into community assets when their skills and motivations align with social needs. Her assessment of the multiple benefits generated by Marcus's rehabilitation provided framework for evaluating similar cases where criminal behavior coexisted with valuable capabilities that could serve beneficial purposes. Officer Mitchell's near-death experience ultimately saved not just her own life but potentially countless others who will benefit from Dr. Thompson's expertise and the institutional changes his case has catalyzed, Dr. Santos reflected, highlighting how individual medical crises could generate lasting positive outcomes when approached with creativity and commitment to maximizing human potential rather than simply managing legal consequences. The broader impact of Marcus's case extended throughout medical education, criminal justice policy, and law enforcement training as institutions recognized the lessons his transformation provided about recognizing valuable knowledge and capabilities regardless of their unconventional sources or origins. The Thompson case has become standard curriculum in medical schools nationwide, reported Medical Education Association President Dr. Robert Chen, because it perfectly illustrates how diagnostic insights can emerge from unexpected sources and how medical professionals need to remain open to information that challenges conventional assumptions about expertise and authority. The educational integration of Marcus's story provided lasting framework for training future physicians to recognize valuable knowledge regardless of its source while maintaining appropriate professional standards and ethical boundaries. Law enforcement agencies have implemented new protocols for chemical exposure during drug investigations, announced Police Training Institute Director Patricia Martinez, based on Dr. Thompson's recommendations about contaminated substances and their delayed medical effects that conventional training programs hadn't addressed adequately. The practical applications of Marcus's expertise in police training demonstrated how individual cases could catalyze systematic improvements in occupational safety and health protection for law enforcement personnel. Criminal justice reform advocates cite the Thompson case as evidence that rehabilitation approaches focusing on individual capabilities and community benefit can achieve better outcomes than traditional incarceration for certain types of offenders, noted Policy Research Institute Director David Rodriguez. Particularly those whose criminal behavior coexisted with skills or knowledge that could serve beneficial social purposes. The policy implications of Marcus's successful rehabilitation provided evidence for arguments about criminal justice reform that emphasized individual assessment and creative sentencing over uniform punitive approaches. Most significantly, Rodriguez continued, the case demonstrates that society benefits when institutions are willing to look beyond criminal records to identify and develop human potential that can serve constructive purposes rather than being wasted through approaches that prioritize punishment over rehabilitation and social contribution. His analysis of the broader social lessons provided philosophical framework for understanding how individual cases could influence institutional policies and practices in ways that benefited entire communities. Officer Mitchell's recovery and Dr. Thompson's transformation represent success story that validates belief in human redemption and institutional flexibility when exceptional circumstances warrant creative approaches to justice and social responsibility, Rodriguez concluded, providing inspirational narrative that demonstrated how medical crises could catalyze positive changes that extended far beyond individual outcomes to influence systematic approaches to education, criminal justice, and community health.